In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
In the election of 1876, the Republicans nominated Rutherford B. Hayes, the governor of Ohio, while the Democrats, out of power since 1861, elected Samuel J. Tilden, the governor of New York. The initial returns pointed to a Tilden victory as the Democrats captured the swing states of Connecticut, Indiana, New Jersey, and New York. By midnight on Election Day, Tilden had 184 of the 185 electoral votes needed to win. He led the popular vote by 250,000. But the Republicans refused to accept the result. They accused the Democrats of using physical intimidation and bribery to discourage African Americans from voting in the South. The final outcome hinged on the disputed result in 4 states: Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, and South Carolina, which prevented either candidate from securing a majority of electoral votes.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome, everybody. Broadcasting from the steel buckle of the Rust Belt in, my polling place. This is the Abracast, and I'm John Tower. So, you guys know what we do here. We do shows on the occult, on history, on conspiracy, and on violence. And a couple weeks ago, we did an episode called The Election Transition Conspiracy, The War Game. Now, I had an episode followed up that was going to be a Sunday show, like the normal show, in a week or two. But with all the shit that just happened in the fucking whole world right now, I felt like I was just going to take it and make it into a bonus show and talk about that shit right now. Because if you guys remember the election transition conspiracy, the war game, you'll remember that I started the whole thing out by talking about conspiracy theories and how I didn't need the Barack Obama as a clone of a pharaoh conspiracy theory, and I didn't need the real Star Wars advanced space program, or Nazis on the moon, or UFOs in Antarctica. I don't need that shit, because we pay attention to the conspiracies that are happening in front of our face, and it usually has to do with politics or the media. Politics and the media. So this is your trigger warning. If you got, that's why it's a bonus show right now, is because this is going to get into politics, but it's going to get into politics of the past, because when we did the election transition conspiracy, the war game, what we were doing is we were breaking down this executive summary from the Transition Integrity Project, which was a whole bunch of leftists got together and they war gamed out these transitional these different scenarios for how the election was going to turn out. And the one that turned out the worst is if Trump won by a landslide. And in the Transition Integrity Project executive summary of their wargaming, what had happened is they said that they were going to looked at the election of 1876 as a model for how they were going to respond. And even though I kind of have an overview of it. I understand it. I wanted to bring it to you guys, so I thought that I would do the election transition conspiracy, the history. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about the dispute. This is going to be a history episode. The occult, history, and conspiracy. So the election transition conspiracy, the war game was a conspiracy episode. This is a history episode. We're going to be breaking down what had happened in 1876. We're going to be talking about why it happened, and we're going to be talking about unintended consequences. And then we're also going to be jumping through time a little bit. And we're going to be talking a little bit, well, we're going to be talking also a lot about stuff that is, it sounds like it's current events, right? We're going to be talking about the last time someone tried to pack the Supreme Court. We're going to be talking about the election of 1876, which sounds boring, but no, dude, it has to do with like Jim Crow and Reconstruction. And then we're going to talk about the Supreme Court packing, the last time a president tried to do it and what happened. And then hold on, I got something else too. Let me find it. Oh, and then I just thought, because this is something that is what kind of happened to me. This was part of my sort of my understanding. I call it what do I call it? I call it the parking lot talk. Something that happened, and this is one of these things that happened to me where I used to bang on about the Electoral College and how it sucked and it didn't need to be there. It's because I didn't understand it. So because in the war game, they talked about this. They talked about packing the Supreme Court. Specifically, they talked about mandatory replacement after a Supreme Court justice was 70 years old. Now, that war game was ran in July or June, one of the J's. And so it's kind of the strategy has kind of metamorphosed since then. Now they're talking about packing the court, which is a little bit different, but I thought that we could talk about it because motherfucker won't answer the question if he's going to do it. He said, if I answer that question, that's going to be all that anyone wants to talk about. What does that say to you? It sounds like it means that he's going to pack the court. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it means and then what happened last time of another president tried to do it. And then in the war game specifically, one of the bargains that they had, you're going to be like, what are you talking about bargains? You're going to see, because they bargained in 1876. That's where they got this idea from. They bargained to get rid of the Electoral College. And because this is one of my 1,000 points of light coming at you, I was like, well, let's really talk about the Electoral College, because I'm not saying that, I'm just saying civics class doesn't teach you anything. I was banging on about the Electoral College, and I started reading the Federalist Papers for a totally different reason. And I ran into a Federalist paper about the Electoral College, and I was like, oh, snap. Anyhow, so let's just get into it. Okay, so raise whatever you're drinking on this evening. Oh, yeah. I'm fucking scattered. I'm all over the place. I just kind of sprung this on myself. So, join me in thanking my Subscribe Star and Patreon supporters. Thank you guys. And if you would like to, consider supporting the show. That'd be great. Check out the new website, abercast.com. Oh man, it's doing so good too. I kept checking my analytics. I was posting on Instagram about it. So the website's going really well. I added a Discord server. I had a Slack work group at one point in time. And then I had a Flick account at one point in time. But I just thought that we try this Discord server. So if you're a Discord user, the link will be in the show notes, the permanent invite to my Discord server. And I'm working on what we're going to do with it and all that stuff. But yeah, just drop in and holler. Let me know that you're out there. And I need to mention real quick that I should say what started this whole thing off is this. We've been tracking Hunter Biden and Ukraine and China and Joe Biden. We've been tracking them for a long time. You could check the feature topic link at abercast.com. Joe Biden has his own little section now. It has the Extortion 1-7 episode. It's got the other episodes. But so this news broke, and there seems to be a pretty solid chain of custody on how this news got to the New York Post. But they started posting about it, and Twitter, Facebook, Google, and now even Amazon somehow did it. They are cracking down. No one is allowed to repost this link to this episode. So it's like literally, I used to say, like, I feel like we're starting from like between the prologue and chapter 1 of 1984. Literally, we're here. The Ministry of Truth is shutting news down for strictly 100% political purposes. And you're going to say, John, wait, hold on, motherfucker. This is not political purposes. This was hacked. The Twitter explained that they don't do hacked they don't do hacked content. And I'm like, no, motherfucker, don't you remember the fappening? They fucking do it all the time. They do it all the time. Remember a week and a half ago when Trump's fucking taxes got leaked and then Twitter didn't pull any of that shit. Anyhow, so that's kind of the impetus of all of this. I felt like I need to adjust my timeline because things getting crazy and all these things that we've been talking about for years. All this social media manipulation, all this stuff is like it's starting to become real. And not only just real, it's starting to become relevant. They're out there banging their drum about interfering in elections. What is that? What is this if it's not interfering in elections? All right. God, I'm long. Okay, here we go. The disputed presidential election of 1876, Digital History ID 3109. Picking it up from where I left it off in the cold open. Republican, and look you're going to see this. This is, a lot of this is going to sound really familiar. Republicans accused Democrats in Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina of refusing to count African American votes and other Republican votes. Now, if you are just like a mainstream media person, you're going to be like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Black people were voting for Republicans? Yes. The Republicans freed the slaves. Bull Connor was a Democrat, and we're going to get into Jim Crow here. In turn, accused Republicans of ignoring many Tilden votes in Florida. The Republicans claim that they have won by 922 votes out of about 47,000 cast. The Democrats claim 94-vote victory. They charged the Republicans had ruined ballots in pro-Tilden Florida precincts by smearing them with ink. Do you guys remember 2000? Maybe you don't. I don't know. You might be too young. Hanging chads in Florida. Both Democrats and Republicans in Oregon acknowledged that Hayes had carried the state. Now, this is important because this also comes up in the executive summary of the Transition Integrity Project. They had acknowledged that Hayes had carried the state. But when the Democrat governor learned that one of the Republican electors was a federal employee and ineligible to serve as an elector, he replaced him with a Democrat elector. The Democrat or the Republican elector, however, resigned his position as a postmaster and claimed the right to cast his ballot for Hayes. Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, and South Carolina each submitted two sets of electoral returns to Congress with different results. This is where the chaos is going to come in. We're 2 weeks away from this, guys. We're fucking 2 weeks away. This shit is going to happen. To resolve the dispute, Congress in January 1877 established an electoral commission made up of 5 U.S. representatives, 5 senators, 5 Supreme Court justices, The justices included 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and Justice David Davis, who was considered to be independent. That means that he was a leftist. But before the commission could render a decision, Democrats in the Illinois legislature, under pressure from a nephew of Samuel Tilden, elected Davis to the U.S. Senate in hopes that it would discourage Davis to support the Democrat. Instead, Davis recused himself and was replaced by Joseph Bradley. Bradley was a Republican, but considered to be one of the court's least political members. Okay, I'm going to just start skipping through this stuff. Bradley's vote produced an 8-7 ruling along straight party lines to award all the disputed elector votes to Rutherford B. Hayes. This result produced in such acrimony that it feared that it would incite a second civil war. Democrats threatened to filibuster. Now, filibuster is something they're talking about getting rid of. Joe's going to get rid of this when he gets into office. Now, the filibuster is designed to slow things down in Congress. So another thing that you'll understand when you read the Federalist Papers is the difference between the Senate and the Congress. Now, the Congress is kind of like it's the will of the moment. That's why they have elections more often, is because they're plugged into their constituency and they are to do the things that need to be done fast. And the Senate is to be more thoughtful and have kind of like a bigger view. This is why there's 2 per state instead of by the population or whatever. So the filibuster is designed to slow things down, and that's why they want to get rid of it. They want to get rid of it if they have the majority. They're planning on having the majority, because the other thing they're planning on doing is states, right? Puerto Rico, they're going to make Puerto Rico a state. That gives them 2. They're going to make Washington, D.C. a state. That's going to give them 2 more. There's never going to be a Republican in power after this. The majority after this. And then they're like, we're going to get rid of the filibuster so we can jam whatever the fuck we want through. A meeting in February 1877, Washington, D.C.'s that's an awful name, Wormley Hotel, which was operated by an African-American. Democratic leaders accepted Hayes' election in exchange for Republican promises to withdraw federal troops from the South. Okay, so we are in Reconstruction era right now in 1876. So they want to remove federal troops. The federal troops were there for Reconstruction. They also they want to remove federal troops from the South, provide federal funding for internal improvements to the South, and then name a prominent Southerner to the president's cabinet. When the federal troops were withdrawn, the Republican governments in Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina collapsed, bringing Reconstruction to a formal end. Under the so-called Compromise of 1877, the national government would no longer intervene in Southern affairs, and this would permit the imposition of racial segregation and the disenfranchisement of black voters. So, the Compromise of 1877, according to History.com, the Compromise of 1877 was an informal agreement between Southern Democrats who did not want Reconstruction, who were pro-Jim Crow, and allies of the Republican Rutherford Hayes to settle on the results of the 1876 presidential election and marked the end of the Reconstruction era. Immediately after the presidential election of 1876, it became clear that the outcome of the race hinged largely on disputed returns from Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and only 3 states in the South, with Reconstruction-era Republican governments still in power. As a bipartisan congressional commission debated over the outcome early 1877, allies of the Republican Party candidate Rutherford Hayes met in secret with moderate Southern Democrats in order to negotiate acceptance of Hayes' election. The Democrats agreed not to block Hayes' victory on the condition of the Republicans' withdrawal of federal troops in the South, thus consolidating Democratic control over the region. The result of the so-called Compromise of 1877, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina became Democratic once again, effectively bringing an end to the Reconstruction era. All right, skipping down to the bottom of this article. The Compromise of 1876 effectively ended the Reconstruction era. The Southern Democrats promised to protect civil and political rights of blacks were not kept, and the end of federal interference in Southern affairs led to widespread disenfranchisement of black voters from the late 1870s onward. Southern legislature passed a series of laws requiring the separation of whites from, quote, persons of color, unquote, on the public transportation in schools, parks, restaurants, theaters, and other locations. Known as the, quote, Jim Crow laws, unquote. This was after a popular minstrel act developed in the antebellum years. That just means pre-Civil War. These segregationist statutes governed life in the South through the middle of the next century, ending only after the hard-won success of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So this is the election and the Compromise of 1876, and like I said, I wanted to talk about this because this is the model that Tony Podesta used, or John Podesta, one of the Podestas, the pedophilic Podesta used when he was playing Joe Biden in the election transition conspiracy, the war game. So next I want to talk about court packing. So what happened when Obama left office is he had totally neglected choosing judges for these lower courts. And so when Trump got elected, he had like 300 or 400 judge spots that it's his obligation to fill. So he started hiring all these judges. He started pumping them through and getting them appointed into their offices. So when you hear Joe Biden or Chuck Schumer or whoever is out there talking about the Republicans are the one packing the courts, that's what they're talking about. They are talking about Trump and his administration appointing judges that are not, there's no judge on the bench. It's their duty to get these judges in, get them approved, and appointing them. So when you hear these dopes saying that, well, Trump's packing the court, that's what they're talking about. But what packing the court really means, and this is historically what packing the Supreme Court really means, is when you have, 9 justices or 5 justices or 6 justices. It doesn't really lay it out in Congress, which someone needs to pass a law restricting the amount of justices right now. They actually should have done it 3 years ago. But what they're talking about is the president gets up there, whoever's president, he's like, you know what, we're going to expand the number of judges to 12 or to 19 or to 58. The number, like I said, is arbitrary. So, if you want like a judge that leans to the left for the rest of time, you're like, okay, well, I want 12 judges, and then I get to appoint, 3 or 10 or 6 or however many judges, and that will mean that it'll be left until they start dying off or whatever, and then you can always just make more. You can just make more seats. So this is what is talking about when people are starting to ask Joe if he's going to pack the court. And Joe's like, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to play his game. Come on, man. It's because he doesn't want to say, yeah, I'm planning on packing the court. And another reason they're trying to do this, and this is a reason that the Supreme Court is so important to the left, is that when they can't legislate the right way when they can't get their shit passed legislatively. Like, this is a perfect thing, like with Obamacare, right? Like, everybody voted. Obamacare could not get through Senate or Congress, and it actually got pushed up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, this guy that everyone thought was going to be a righty turned out to be a leftist, and he passed it through. It's because this is one of the places where the left legislates from. So when you hear the words like we're talking about with Amy Coney Barrett, ACB or whatever they're calling her, whenever they say he's an originalist, you're an originalist. That means that you don't think the Constitution is this living, breathing document where the meanings of the names change. It means what it means, and that's it. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous for people that are trying to move the ball, right? So let's talk about the last guy that tried to pack the Supreme Court. This article by Gillian Brockell called "FDR Tried to Pack the Supreme Court During the Depression, and It Was a Disaster for Him." It was called Black Monday on May 27, 1935. The Supreme Court struck down 3 of FDR's signature New Deal laws. FDR was outraged, and he believed the Supreme Court was preventing him from doing what was needed to rescue the country from the Great Depression, which had devastated the economy and forced millions of Americans into breadlines. Now, more than 8 decades later, some Democrats are once again urging an expansion of the Supreme Court in the wake of liberal Justice RBG's death. What is court packing, and why are some Democrats seriously considering it? It didn't go well for FDR at the time. Democrats controlled the House, Senate, and White House, but the court, led by Chief Justice Charles E. Hughes, was a Republican and 75 years old. 75 years old. Because of the cut in the Supreme Court pensions, the older justices were disinclined to retire, and they kept issuing rulings against the New Deal. Shortly after winning a second term, the president proposed to his fix in 1937, expand the bench by 6 justices, 1 for each justice over the age of 70. Remember the war game. The Constitution doesn't specify how many justices should serve on the Supreme Court. George Washington nominated the 6 Supreme Court justices on September 24th, 1789, moments after Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1789. The Senate confirmed them all in just 2 weeks. Eventually, under Abraham Lincoln, the number of justices grew to 10 before Congress decided to limit the number at 9 in 1869. Roosevelt wanted 15 justices, claiming the measure was needed to clear backlogged dockets and for some, quote, a constant infusion of new blood into the courts, unquote. Washington Post columnist Franklin Waltman didn't buy it. In writing, Mr. Roosevelt's real objective is to make the Supreme Court amiable to his will, either by forcing from that tribunal some of those who have disagreed with him, or by permitting him to offset their votes with men of his own choosing. And there it is. That's it. I could just stop reading right now. The president pushed the change a month later in the fireside chat radio address. But the proposal was greeted with a bipartisan derision. According to Marion C. McKenna, author of Franklin Roosevelt and the Great Constitutional War, the court-packing crisis of 1937, whose Judiciary Committee Chairman Hatton W. Summers, a Democrat, refused to hear it. So it was sent to the Senate Judiciary Committee instead, and it was buried in protracted hearings led by another Democrat, Henry Ashurst. Even Roosevelt's Vice President, John Nance Garner was against it. While the bill was read on the Senate floor, Garner stood in the back. Now imagine this. Garner stood in the back of the chamber holding his nose with one hand and vigorously shaking his thumbs down with the other, McKenna says. While on March 29th, 1937, the court handed down 3 more decisions, this time favorable to the New Deal. It seemed like a win for Roosevelt, but it undercut his argument for packing the court. It was further undercut in May. It was further undercut in May when one of the justices announced his retirement on the same day the bill finally left committee with an adverse vote. The bill was dealt a final blow that July when the death of Senate Majority Leader Joseph T. Robinson. Robinson was one of the few vocal supporters of the court packing plan. Roosevelt had promised him a seat on the extended bench. The bill was sent back to committee on a 70-20 vote and stripped of all of its most controversial provisions.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
The court packing plan, divided in the New Deal coalition, squandered the political advantage Roosevelt had gained in the 1936 election and gave fresh ammunition to those who accused him of dictatorship. He was a dictator. He was totally a dictator. Who accused him of dictatorship, tyranny, and fascism. He was all of those things, by the way. Historian Michael Parrish wrote in the Washington Law Review in 1984, when the dust settled, FDR had suffered a humiliating political defeat. But in the end, Roosevelt still got what he wanted. By the close of his, listen to this, by the close of his second term, 3 justices had retired and 2 had died. He got to replace all of them. All told, Roosevelt appointed 9 justices to the Supreme Court. So the reason I pointed out at the close of his second term is because Roosevelt was president for 3 terms. Unprecedented. You know how whenever a Republican's getting ready to leave office and they're like, he really wanted a 3rd term. He was going to change the Constitution to have a 3rd term. They said it about Bush. They say it about everybody. But we're going to find out. We will find out. I think we'll find out. Yeah, I think we're going to find out right here. Only Democrats try to get 3rd terms. This one actually got it. And then there was Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson tried to get a 3rd term, but he was in a fucking coma or something. All right. Actually, I'm going to back up here. I skipped something. I think we're going to talk about it for a little bit. Are we repeating the pandemic election of a century ago by Ed Kilgore, Intelligencer magazine? Now, I don't know much about Mr. Ed Kilgore. I do know that he is very left, and it's going to seep through. It's going to seep through his thoughts here as we chip through this article. Are we repeating the pandemic election year of a century ago? The reason I chose this is because I'm starting to believe more and more and more that the whole reason for this lockdown is for mail-in ballots. That might sound conspiratorial, and you might be like, well, how come the people all across the world had to get locked down? Well, because it's the fucking cover story, and that's how important it is. It's global. It's a fight against globalism. Anyhow, not every place ever got locked down 100%, but okay, here we go. I'm burning time. I gotta get on. I gotta fucking stick to it. In a tense election year like this one, it can only be comforting to find historical analogies to provide perspective and guidance, which is what we're doing here. Its entire politically aware population remains transfixed by the 2016 election and its improbable result. It was too close and too ambiguous to offer much in the way of a prophetic view for either Trump or Biden partisans. Among those who hope for a Trump comeback, okay, blah, 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 blah. Here's how he introduced the comparison in his New Yorker essay, which was published this week. I didn't clip what date this came out, I'm sorry. When Democrats, against the electoral circumstances that changed Wilson, this is Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, for Harding, a Republican, some of the tumults of the 2020 appear to be a centennial reiteration or inversion of the calamities and losings of the 1920 campaign. Men in the country recently riven by disease, inflamed with racial violence, and anxious about immigration, torn between isolation and globalism, yearned what the winning candidate somewhat malapropically promised would be a return to normalcy. Early in 2020, the term remained useful to the supporters of Joe Biden, with its suggestion of presidential behavior once more within the pale. The world's nostalgic tenor soon enough made the anathema to left-wing Democrats, and the cyclonic circumstances of the past 6 months may have made it feel obsolete to Biden himself. But it is still what he is talking about when he calls for the removing of Donald Trump. Quote, "Will we rid ourselves of this toxin, or will we make it a permanent part of our national character?" Unquote. The idea that 2020 is a centennial revival of 1920 travails should be confronting to Biden, because the support to normalcy the guy is like the most corrupt politician ever. We now have, I'm sorry, I'm editorializing. The prevailing mood of the country was troubled, and the recent past weighed heavily on the voters who wanted to forget it. I'm skipping ahead. While Wilson was unable to pursue the third term he clearly coveted due to his debilitating stroke, which left his wife Edith virtually in charge of the country, his policies, in particular his frustrated desire for U.S. ascension to the League of Nations, hamstrung Democratic nominee and Ohio Governor James Cox to an extent. Fallon does not acknowledge the normalcy Harding represents was a natural Republican majority that returned after two Wilson terms. Democrats won a plurality of the vote in 1912 election because Teddy Roosevelt's bull moose. Progressives temporarily split the GOP. Wilson was reelected in 1916, again without a majority of the vote, mostly thanks to the pledge to stay out of the horrible European war, a promise that he violated just weeks, almost immediately. He swore in and was like, okay, let's get an army together. Anyhow, this whole article is just rife with just totally ignoring, like, Joe Biden's obvious racism. It's just so funny. What would Corn Pop say, Joe? That's what old Corn Pop was a bad dude. Like I said, you can hit the abercast.com feature topic link and find all about Corn Pop and how poor kids can be just as bright and just as intelligent and just as talented as white kids. White kids. Yeah, so hit the topic link. All right. Enough foolishness. We're going to follow up with this Electoral College stuff. 5 Reasons to Keep the Electoral College by Taegan Goddard's Electoral Vote Map. The future of the Electoral College is being debated following the 2016 presidential elections, when the winners of the popular vote lost the Electoral College vote, and thus the election. This is why it was designed. Advocates of the institutional point of its functionality, endurance, and tradition as valuable features. The Electoral College is also viewed as a critical part of the checks and balances fundamental to the American political system. The following 5 reasons to keep the Electoral College are used by its defenders. It's to maintain American federalism. 1. A key argument to keep the Electoral College is the process is integral to America's federalist philosophy. So I'm going to try not to jump in and out here because I'm running out of time. But this federalism is a point that we should make, right? Especially in the face of COVID, what had happened during the pandemic, where everybody was like, oh, Mr. President, you have to do a federal mask mandate, and you have to make these general stretching rules across the whole country. And Trump was like, I'm not going to do that. And I think the reason why is he was like, how am I ever going to even enforce that? Like, how am I going to do that? But this is stuff that Biden's talking about, right? And the reason the media was pushing him to do that and talking about how he should do it is so they could have labeled him as a tyrant. He's a tyrant. He's making all of us put masks on. But instead, Trump relied on this idea of federalism, which is lost on presidents most of the time. It seems to me like federalism means that the federal government deals with the federal government and the states deal with it locally. So by pushing it down, what he did is he created nightmare scenarios, right? In places like where I live in Pennsylvania, in like New York, in Michigan, it's these states that are important, where the governors could just go bananas. Like, I'm technically still in lockdown since March. You know what I mean? Like, my restaurants aren't open like normal. Like, my shit's not, I mean, people are kind of doing what they want nowadays, but like, we're still in lockdown. Stupidly. So this idea of federalism is important. Federalism involves a diffusion of powers among federal, state, and local governments rather than a strong central government. The Electoral College is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, but states are allowed to determine how electors are selected. Small states and large states have their say in each presidential election based on that state's popular vote. 2. A tradition of slow but steady institutions. Advocates of Electoral College harken back to the deliberations of the constitutional conventions over the new nation's political process. Harvard law professor Charles Freed argues that state act as diffusers and filters in national politics. Electoral voting blocks by region go back and forth depending on regional changes as well as party stances. These changes take hold over decades of elections rather than oscillating from election to election. Freed suggests that the Electoral College has survived political strife, civil war, and other changes because it represents states' interest in and protects against outlier movements. So this outlier movements business is the important part. Because if you take, like, even the Clinton-Trump thing, take any of them. If this Electoral College wasn't in place, I might just end with this because it makes my point almost perfectly. Instead of saying an outlier movement, think about like how brilliant it was for the founders to put this into the Constitution because, they're thinking of only like 13 states. However, this thing works with 50 states across the whole continent. They wouldn't even be able to comprehend what the fuck they did, right? Because if you take Chicago, if you take Cook County out of the electoral map, and if you take New York out of the electoral map, and you take Southern California out of the electoral map, those 3 regional locations choose the popular vote. That's it. They are so dense that they choose the popular vote. Here's something, I don't know. Okay. There's something else to be said about it, but I'm just going to pass. 3, encourage national campaigns. This is another thing that we saw. I think we're seeing it right now, but it's demonstrably saw in 2016 where Hillary, the nasty lady, she only went to where she had to go to get her popular votes. But the Electoral College makes the whole country as important. It means that they have to do promises, they have to do appearances, they have to answer questions every place. Now you see pick and chooses here and there, but it's all strategic at that point. These deep red states, you don't see Trump doing very many rallies in Texas. He's pretty much got Texas locked down, at least right now. So it's the same. It's the same thing, and this is how battleground states become important. That's why these motherfuckers or their vice presidents have been in my state clogging up the fucking roads for the last month and a half. Is because of the battleground states. It makes the Electoral College makes every place important strategically, on a strategic basis. Number 4, clear and divisive outcomes. In 2018 MIT conference in the Electoral College, Sunny Cortland professor Judy Beth said that the popular vote presidential election would create chaos due to a 50 Florida situation, best referred to the contentious election deadlock that took place in Florida following the 2000 presidential election. Proponents of maintaining the Electoral College often point to the uncertainty surrounding lawsuits, recounts related to popular vote model. So this is what we're going to see. It's not going to be a 50 Floridas thing. It's going to be like a 10 Floridas thing. And there's already lawyers. There's like 300 or 400 lawsuits already filed, already in place, dealing with recounts and vote irregularities. And I'm happy, or I'm sad to say that Pennsylvania is going to be one of these fucking Floridas that we're talking about with the Transition Integrity Project. These 4 or 5 states that they're really focusing on. These are the 4 or 5 states that they needed these mail-in ballots on. And we're already seeing dozens, if not 100 irregularities with these mail-in ballots. Every time that you look at the TV, there's our tyrant Governor Egghead Tom the Egghead Wolf explaining that, we just sent 12,000 invalid ballots out, but don't worry, your election's safe and sound. This is going down. This is happening, and this is the historical context for it all. 5, pitfalls of a popular vote. Many arguments for keeping the Electoral College in place poke holes in arguments made for popular vote elections. Guelzo is among many advocates who note that the United States is a constitutional republic rather than a democracy, which is something that a lot of people don't seem to understand. Again, due to reading some of the Federalist Papers, you get it. The Founding Fathers thought that democracy on its face was mob rule. It was mob rule. Every man has a vote, sure, but you have to focus that. You have to focus it through your representatives or whatever, and that's the way the Electoral College focuses mob rule into, a system. He also counters arguments for the concept of one person, one vote by noting that a conception comes from the U.S. Supreme Court decision rather than from a constitutional provision. In short, advocates see the Electoral College as a legitimate approach to presidential elections based on the country's origins. I was going to read this big thing about the Heritage Foundation. They published this essay in 2004 about the Electoral College, but I give you enough information, you go find it yourself. I gotta wrap it up. It's chilly night here at the Hacienda, and I gotta go get to it. I bought a bag of Fritos and everything. So I'm John. This has been a bonus episode of the Abercast. We're talking about the history of the much disputed election of 1876 and the compromise of 1877, which is the template that the Transition Integrity Project used when they war gamed out a Trump victory just in June or July of this year. It's interesting. So let's see. T-shirts, feature topic link, brand new website. Let me know. I know you're going there. Let me know what you think about the website. Let me know if you can think of something else you want on the website. I'm always tinkering on it. That leads me to the Discord server. I'm old. I'm an old man. So I don't. So I'm still trying to figure the Discord server out, but it looks cool, and we've had a Slack work group before, and I used to play around on Flickr. I can't remember what it was called or whatever, but this just seems like a better system, and it seems easy to download and easy to get set up into. So follow the link in the show notes or in the Discord server on the website. There's it's supposed to be a permanent invite into the Discord server. So sign in, check it out. Let me know what you think. There's not a whole lot of shit going on in there right now, but I'm hoping to fix that pretty soon. I'm John. This is the Abercast, and I hope you guys are staying safe. Think about buying some emergency food. We're running out of time because between the beginning of November and the fucking middle of January is going to be a fucking chaotic time. You want to make sure that you can feed your family, buy a couple extra magazines. If you could get your hands on some ammo, go ahead and do that. And just watch out. Watch out for yourself, and please be careful. I hope everybody is safe and doing the right thing. I'm John. This is the Abercast. I'll see you just in a few days, man. I'm still doing a Sunday show.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I am proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.